Welcome to the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute for the Spring 2013 event season. I'm Eric Morse, and our podcast tonight is a presentation to Military History Night on Remembrance Week in Libya in 2010 for the fallen of the Africa Campaign of 1943. The presentation was given on March 13th by RCMI member and amateur historian Doug Wrigglesworth.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Pat, for that very fine introduction. And thank you, Pat, also for all you do to arrange these nights. Those of us who are amateur historians and professional historians, I suspect, really enjoy these. And a special thanks to Eric for his inspired editing of my bio. Anyway, enough said, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, as historians, amateur or professional, one of our dearest dreams is to plant our dusty boots on the same ground tread by our personal heroes. Locations where real history took place. I've been fortunate, from the Hut 6 at Bletchley Park to the Menin Gate at Ypres on Remembrance Day, to experience a few of these. But 2010 was a real treat, as Pat said, courtesy of my very thoughtful son. And I have to tell you, I have two sons who do their darndest to look after the old man, and they do it in the most imaginative ways. This is an example. So let's make sure, there we go. So this is what we hope to do tonight. On the right, you'll see my young family who, Mike, the father, of course, has lived in Benghazi for more than 10 years, off and on, as an engineer, first of all, for Pure Technologies, a Calgary engineering company whose responsibility was the Great Man-Made River Project. A bit more in a moment. Four of them, with the exception of Libby, who's the tiny one in her dad's arms, the other four escaped on the last commercial flight out of Benghazi before the balloon went up recently, thanks to Turkish Air. Now Mike flies Turkish Air everywhere he can. Libby was getting ready to be born. She was born about 2 weeks after they arrived home from Benghazi. So Libby, hence the name Libby. So that's what we hope to get done tonight. Just very quickly, the Great Man-Made River Project. This is one of Gaddafi's projects that nobody hears much about, but it's really quite marvelous. Here's Benghazi and Tripoli, and his plan is to access these deep aquifers underneath the Sahara, which have plenty of water, and pipe it up to the coastline for irrigation and drinking water. And it works quite well. The lines go through these 4-meter diameter, not 4 foot, 4-meter diameter pre-stressed concrete pipes. And Mike's company's job is to monitor the condition of these pipes, catch leaks before they happen, and catch failures before it gets worse. And they've had quite a great deal of success. Mike is now vice president of the company and responsible for Africa and Europe, and enough of family stuff here. But the Great Man-Made Rivers Project is quite interesting. So, tonight, what happens if, I better not move. I can talk from here. So here's, just to get our geography straight, I'm a great map person. You're going to see lots of maps tonight, and I'll wave this red button around and try to show you things. But here's the North African coastline, in which the North African campaign took place, essentially from Alamein here through to Tripoli. Our attention tonight is going to be in this area. Here's Benghazi, here's Tobruk. But there's all kinds of familiar names, those of you who have read and studied about the campaign, that we'll run into today. More of those later. But that's our where we're at, as it were. This evening, we're concentrating from Benghazi along the coastal road to Tobruk. So, where's that portable mic? I need to get out here so I can see. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Okay. But I can't. Can you record? Are you recording? Yeah, all right. Okay. So, places that are familiar. Here's Tobruk. Here's the wire, or the border between Egypt and Libya. The Italians built this great stretch of wire along this border, hopefully to keep people out, which wasn't very effective. But the Al-Faya Pass, Sollum, Sidi Barani, all these places that are familiar to those who've studied this. GAZALA, Derna, CYRENE, we will visit later. Benghazi. El Gila, down here, is where a lot of this stuff ended. A lot of the back and forth of the campaign sort of went from here around down to El Gila, then somebody else got an advantage back up here, and then back down again. More of that as we go along here. I love these two. The two types by John. Many of you are probably familiar. I got to make sure that I go back here and read my script. The two types blasted their way into the affections of all readers of British Army newspapers in North Africa, Italy, Sicily, southern France, and Greece. The two types, for all their deceptively fatuous appearance, were characters of violence and action. They did not coax. They did not wheedle. Their attitude to the world and everyone else in it was hit or miss. Either you like us or you hate us. We don't worry a damn either way. They came overseas as army officers, battered into an appreciation of the niceties of dress and deportment by ferocious OCTU commandants and unbending commanding officers. It took the Western Desert to transform them into the two types. So, first phase, and I acknowledge immediately the BBC website. If you Google the BBC website on the North African campaign, you'll see all these lovely maps, only they're animated even. They got arrows actually moving as you watch them. But anyway, these are direct steals, and I acknowledge it. So here we are, phase one. The wars, Italy declares war. They make a little zap across the wire, and there's the wire, incidentally, and an old Rolls-Royce armored car of the 11th Hussars, contemplating driving over it. A very small, essentially quite small British force, but they were the first to use these left hook business, where the Italians were all lined up, all set for people to come along the road at them, and the Brits, of course, went around and in behind, and oh, my goodness, their doors were open at the back. Anyway, essentially destroyed the Italian army. This lovely little piece here, and this is the first time this was done of several times. The shortcut through rather impassable desert by Masous to Bedafum, where the Brits found the Italians coming down the road at a great rate and essentially destroyed the Italian 10th Army. And it sort of all ended up here at El Agila. Defense line. Okay, but what happens? Two things happen at this point. A, Churchill decides that Greece needs help. And against the great opposition from his army commanders, he pulls, I forget, half or two-thirds of the force that's sitting here holding the Italians, and they're all ready to take off for Tripoli. Takes them off to Greece. Second thing that happens at the same time, guess who arrives? Good old Rommel and the Africa Corps. Hitler sends them to avoid the Italians being complete disgraces. So, that's the end of phase one. Just some examples of the equipment. These were captured Italian tanks, but you can see by the kangaroo on the side that the Australians have already grabbed it and are making good use of it. The Matildas, pretty early tank stuff, but look at the going. This is typical of that whole area. Rocks. Try driving a 2006 four-wheel drive car over this stuff. It's murder. It's murder. I can't imagine how they made it. So, phase 2. Rommel arrives. Gadam. Back up. However, at this point, Tobruk holds. He gets past Tobruk, gets up to Salum here, Bardia, up to the border here, but he can't take Tobruk. To quote, 24th of March, 1941, Rommel's tanks sliced through the thinly held front at El Agila, sending the British into retreat. By the 15th of April, the Axis forces are back at Salum, just inside Egypt, with British forces still holding on to the Libyan port of Tobruk. Rommel fails to take Tobruk, but defeats the British counterattacks from Egypt in May and June. A 4-month stalemate follows, during which Rommel is denied reinforcements from Germany, and British forces are reorganized into the 8th Army. So here's Tobruk. As you can tell, a German version of the defense line. But here's the defense line. And this is a defense line that was built by the Italians in the 30s when they colonized in a very brutal way Libya. And there's all kinds of interesting history behind that too. Talk to local Libyans today. There's artifacts of the god-awful stuff the Italians did. Here's some of the desert rats. But as you can see, Tobruk, natural harbor. Couple of good movies. Somebody's talking about history movies. Believe it or not, this is a pretty good, for my reading, a pretty good illustration of what it was like during that siege. Richard Burton, James Mason, Robert Newton. Wonderful trio here. And this one here, I just found on the web, but it's not bad. It's 1944, Australian made, and rather good. So, the siege of Tobruk, it was a confrontation that lasted 240 days. Its siege started on the 11th of April. In 1941, when Tobruk was attacked by the Italian-German force under Rommel, continued for 240 days up to the 27th of November, when it was relieved by the Allied 8th Army during Operation Crusader. It was vital for the Allies' defense of Egypt and the Suez Canal to hold this town with its harbor, so this forced the enemy to bring most of their supplies overland from the port of Tripoli, across 1,500 kilometers of desert, as well as diverting troops from the advance. Tobruk was subject to repeated ground assaults and almost constant shelling and bombing. The Nazi propaganda called the tenacious offenders rats, a term which the Australian soldiers embraced as an ironic compliment. For much of the siege, Tobruk was defended by the reinforced Australian 9th Division under Leslie Moorhead. General Wavell, Commander-in-Chief of the British Middle East Command, instructed Moorhead to hold the fortress for 8 weeks. 8 weeks, 56 days. But the 7th Australian Division held it for over 5 months, before being gradually withdrawing during September and replaced by the British 7th Infantry Division with some elements of Polish and Czech forces, under the command of Major General Scobie. The fresh defenders continued to hold Tobruk until they were able to link with the advancing 8th Army at the end of November during Operation Crusader. The Tobruk Ferry Service, made up of Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy warships, played an important role. There's a couple of really good books written about that Tobruk Ferry Service. Provided gunfire support supplies, fresh troops, and ferried out the wounded. Maintaining control of Tobruk was crucial. Other than Benghazi, Tobruk was the only major port on the North African coast between Tripoli and Alexandria. Had the Allies lost it, the German and Italian supply lines would have been drastically shortened. Rommel was in no position to attack across the Egyptian border towards Cairo, while the Tobruk garrison threatened his lines of supply. So this was the first time during the Second War that the advance of the German panzers had been brought to a halt. Following Operation Crusader, the siege of Tobruk was lifted in December, and more to come. So here's the rats in their holes, and we come to phase 3. So we're back, going in the other direction. The British strike west on the 18th November, but a German counterattack cuts into the rear of the 8th Army, almost wrecking the offensive. Weeks of fighting ensue until Rommel concedes defeat and breaks out westwards. The British try to cut across the desert. Whoops, back up. Try to cut across the desert again, but this time Rommel's a little smarter than the Italian predecessors, and he had a defense line set up, and that didn't work. So the Axis forces retreated past Ajdabia. Ajdabia there. That's incidentally where my son, a lot of Pure Technologies sort of headquarters is in Ajdabia. Anyway, through Ajdabia and back again to El Agela. And my apologies if those who are better speakers of Arabic and Libyan place names than I am. I'm doing my best. So, here we are again. Whoops, back again. This time, Rommel, of course, because his supply lines are shorter, and Hitler coughs up some troops and equipment, and they actually get across the Mediterranean from Italy without being sunk by British submarines. So back they go again, and Tobruk is captured. But part of the problem was the idea of the boxes. The British set up a line of boxes here, which more later, that were static and not the greatest kind of defense in a fluid armored campaign. Anyway, gets through to the first battle of El Alamein here, where they actually managed to hold them off. There's that narrow piece between the Qattara Depression and the sea where the Brits are able to hold them off. And of course, finally arrives lots of equipment, new tanks, new guns, new troops, new CO. Montgomery, of course, did it all by himself, as you know very well, and successfully fights the Battle of El Alamein. As Churchill said, it may almost be said, before Alamein we never had a victory, and after Alamein we never had a defeat. It had not been the first time that the Allies had a numerical superiority in men and equipment in the Western Desert, but never had it been so complete and across all arms. Furthermore, in the past, except in field artillery, they had struggled with the quality of their equipment. With the arrival of Sherman tanks, 6-pounder anti-tank guns, and Spitfires, the Allies at last had the ability to match the opposition. So there's one of the classic pictures of the troops involved in the El Alamein battle. There's those who have complained that Montgomery fought it like a First World War battle, but let's not get into that tonight. So the finale, of course, if you listen to the American propaganda, it was all Americans that landed at Operation Torch at Casablanca and Algiers and I forget the third place. Oran, thank you. But the Americans that did land were green, unschooled, both their officers and the men, and they did a lot of learning between there and the final outcome here as the Axis forces are scrunched up and are forced to surrender at Tripoli. So that's a very, 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 very brief review of this. But we're going to go back and look at it from a different point of view. We were there in Remembrance Week, which is the week before November 11th. The main the big remembrance ceremony in Libya is at Tripoli every year on the 11th. But in the week before, there is a coterie of representatives from several embassies. Now, primarily the ones that we interacted with were 2 American military attachés, 2 French military attachés, the German ambassador and the British ambassador and his wife. So we're able to share this pilgrimage, and we begin at the Benghazi cemetery. And typical of these, they're simply the same kind of ceremony that you'd see in small town Ontario in front of the local cenotaph, where there are prayers, reading of names, the laying of wreaths. But here we have cemeteries. These are Commonwealth cemeteries kept by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which are beautifully maintained. Beautifully maintained. Benghazi was an important goal for both the Allies and the Axis forces during the campaign. There are now 1,214 Commonwealth servicemen of the Second War buried or commemorated in Benghazi. 106 of these are 163 are unidentified. Interesting, a recent report on the War Grave Commission's website points out that there was some nasty damage done to this cemetery during the uprising, and they confirm that once things settle down, they'll be back in and fix it up right away. A couple of interesting graves. Here's Jeffrey Keyes, VC, the son of his father, great naval hero, but he lost his life in that failed raid on Rommel that there were so many movies made of. But this was the beginnings of the SAS. And then here was a lonely Canadian RCAF officer also buried there. How he got there, I'm not sure. So, Benghazi. And of course, after Benghazi, after the ceremony, everybody troops back to the Swedish embassy. The Swedish embassy? Turns out that the Swedish embassy is the gathering place for expats in Benghazi. The Swedes have been there for many years. Am I not talking? I know better. I'm talking into it, all right. I know better. The Swedes have been major players in Libya for a long time, and their embassy in Benghazi has become a gathering place. Some great people. It was interesting, the sort of gathering after the ceremony, and during which the British ambassador awarded the Swedish consulate an honorary British Empire Medal. No, or OBE, that's it, an honorary OBE to the Swedish consulate for all the work he'd done in schools and so on and so forth. Anyway, however, we get in our cars and we head for Tobruk. Come here. I promise I keep up. Yes. So, there we are. Travel to Tobruk. So here we go through the Green Mountains. And they are literally, as this picture demonstrates, relatively fertile areas along the coast. Along the way, our Roman expert will appreciate the ruins at CYRENE. Derived from Kyrie, a spring the Greeks consecrated to Apollo in 630 BC. The Greek colonists from Thera founded the settlement in Cyrene in a lush valley 10 miles from the port of Apollonia in what is now modern-day eastern Libya. Over the next several hundred years, it grew to become a major commercial and cultural center in ancient Libya, second only to Athens. The Libyan ruins of Cyrene are a testament to the city's Roman and Greek past, where crumbling rope and columns and arches are laid out in a Hellenic pattern. Mosaic tiles still remain intact throughout the site. And are there any guards? Are there any fences? Are there any guides? Nothing. You pull up, go in, wander around, do whatever you want. There's no... Interesting, those of you who've seen the latest issue of National Geographic, The cover says Libya in its forgotten past. It describes how one of Gaddafi's problems was that his mind, this was just more examples of European colonialization. Didn't want to have anything to do with these ruins. Didn't put any money in it, didn't pay any attention, and didn't try to protect them. But spectacular to see, spectacular views. And of course, they were still there during the campaign. There's British kilties going through, some Indian infantrymen going through CYRENE, back and forth, back and forth. Also along the way are these famous mosaics, some really quite wonderful mosaics that have been preserved from a couple of basilicas that were unearthed during dam construction. But what they did was take them up off the floor and get them onto the walls where they can be properly seen. However, okay, we're going back to that campaign again. Remember phase 3? The Brits are trying to, they've broken out of, broken out of Tobruk, and they're chasing Rommel. So what do? They build these boxes, defensive positions. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Defensive positions, heavily fortified, mined. Here's Knightsbridge, which was the biggest, and it's set right in the middle of the junction of several tracks, which would be used to bring in supplies. Here's Bir Hakeim. Remember this name, Bir Hakeim, right down at the bottom of this defense line. Gee, look what Rommel did. However, the battle at Bir Hakeim was something else. More on that to come. But here's the Knightsbridge box. Now, as I've said here, the strategy that betrayed less than sound understanding of the fluid nature of armored warfare, the defense against Rommel's 1942 drive towards Suez consisted of a number of irregularly spaced strong points or boxes linked by deep minefields. The chief box, known as Knightsbridge, was situated around a junction of tracks about 20 kilometers west of Tobruk. There's Tobruk. And about 16 kilometers south of Akroma. Akroma's place is right along here. It was a key position and the pivot on which armored maneuvered during the heavy fighting, which commenced in late May of 42. Fierce actions were fought, and they were. Huge casualties, and a battlefield cemetery was created in each for the burial of the dead. Now, it turns out that the largest cemetery in Tobruk is called Knightsbridge, and it is very close to the Knightsbridge box. And as you drive along the coast road towards Tobruk, this is the first you see, way up on the hill. So we stopped. It calls it at Akroma, which is perhaps closer to it than Knightsbridge. But there's now whether this was particularly neat and tidy and nifty because this was Remembrance Week and all these VIPs were coming through, but I suspect not, having met the caretaker, who we'll meet again in a moment. But a beautiful location. So we have our visit to the Knightsbridge Cemetery. We spent quite a bit of time there, and then we went on to Tobruk. Whoops, back up. So as we said, there are two Commonwealth cemeteries, the French and the German. Quite different, as we'll see. The Tobruk Cemetery looks much like the Benghazi Cemetery. We actually got there a little late that morning, traveling with two little kiddies and strange hotels in Tobruk. We were tad late, but however, we caught the last bit. Main feature is the Australia Memorial, the cemetery, but again, a fairly typical, beautifully laid out cemetery. The Tobruk War Cemetery incorporates the burial ground used during the siege and the memorial erected there at the time by the Australians, which has been replaced by a permanent memorial of similar designs. Many battlefield graves in the desert have been brought into this cemetery. There are 2,282 Commonwealth servicemen buried or commemorated here. Now we go up the road, very short distance, to the French Memorial. Now the French Memorial is a gravesite for the casualties at Bir Hakeim. The Free French Division under General Marie-Pierre Koenig defended that little box against the panzers trying to get around and up behind the rest of the boxes. It was quite a campaign. To quote here, it's a remote oasis in the Libyan desert, a former site of a Turkish fort. During the Battle of Gazala, the 1st Free French Division of General Marie-Pierre Koenig defended the site from 26th of May to the 11th of June against attacking German and Italian forces directed by Rommel. Resisting for 16 days, the Free French gave the retreating British 8th Army enough time to reorganize. It's a very sad but a great tale of victory. A force of 3,000 men fought a valiant battle against the massed ranks of the German Africa Corps. Such was the importance of the battle that Rommel came to lead the combat. This is from one of the posters that was in the Free French Army at the time consisted of men from all over the world. French, Congolese, Vietnamese, German, Italian, Polish, American, Muslim, and Jewish names can be found among the fallen. A lot of French Foreign Legion elements, I think. Ironically, their leader was Colonel Koenig, German, probably French Foreign Legion. Their successful defense of the area allowed the British to reach El Alamein and have that final victory. The French forces were trapped and surrounded, but managed to dramatically blow their way out and escape to join British troops. Now, if you could find a copy of this book, you'll find that there were 3,000 men and 1 woman. It's a dandy. Susan Travers was General Koenig's driver and mistress. And she was there, and she describes quite vividly her experiences. Throughout her life, she had quite a life, as you may imagine. But during that battle at Bir Hakeim, and her concern for her general and driving the car that got him out, quite a story. Tomorrow to be brave. It's I think it's dated about year 2000, but it's worth getting a hold of if you can. So, more of the French Memorial. Quite nicely laid out. Lots of individual plaques, and because they brought material in from the cemetery at Bir Hakeim, there's lots of quite ancient and storied pieces in here. A worthwhile visit. So the French, again, there was a memorial service there, wreaths laid, and so on. And on we go to this. Massive stone walls, round towers. I think, from what I could tell, the only entryway was a little doorway here. It looks out over Tobruk like a medieval fortress. Opened in 1955, okay? 1955, and it's an austere memorial to the folly of war. Inside is a great courtyard, at the center of which is a basin for the eternal flame held up by 4 kneeling angels. Arcades surround the courtyard, and on the walls are described the names of all those who fell at Tobruk. Germans, as some of you may know, tended to bury their dead in communal graves and celebrate them by listing the names rather than individual graves. There are 6,026 German soldiers commemorated in this cemetery. So, we have a memorial service here, just the same. There's the American pair, the French pair. This chap here is actually a Canadian padre who was at the time a chaplain of the English church in Tripoli. This is the German ambassador, posing fellow. I think this is the British ambassador and some others that I couldn't identify immediately. But the German ambassador spoke very movingly. And I thought it was very well done. Talked about young men and women who came here to fight for what they believed in. And we're here to commemorate them. And then he closed by saying, and I wish I could remember the exact words, but he said to the effect, "Let us hope that we will never have a dictator again bring us to war." And of course, this is 2010, Gaddafi was still dictator in Libya. However, it was quite moving, quite moving. Just some more of the architecture and the sort of plaques and whatnot that are inside it. Then the cortege, I suppose, heads to Knightsbridge for the ceremony there. So we were back at Knightsbridge, and there's a German ambassador laying a wreath at Knightsbridge. So, we've had our tour of the memorial. However, we got lucky. The old fellow that was the head caretaker at Knightsbridge was a second generation. His father had been caretaker for many years. So he and his wife were there fussing about making sure the place was nifty. And we got talking to him, and by gum, he offered to give us a tour of the defense line. So, we'll take you on that tour. Here's Muhammad and his buddy Oscar Wrigglesworth. The two of them seemed to bond. They had a great time. But look at that. Look at the type of ground. It's common, the rocks. It's not the sandy desert dunes, it's just rocks and awful, awful going. Whoops. There's another look at the terrain. So we're up on the plateau. I should have pointed this out. All along that coast, there's sort of the coast road at sea level, and varying distances back from the sea, there's a cliff and I've lost the word. But up above is the regular desert, so there's quite a climb between the coastal area and where all the action was, and this is up on top. So here we are. I told you you'd see maps tonight. There's Tobruk again, and here's that defense line. These sites are all numbered, as you'll see. And what you're seeing are the 3 defense lines that the British had set up. I think they were colored, I just forget which ones. The areas that we were in were this area here, where the Fig Tree Cemetery is, more about that in a minute. And here's this fort, which was a key place where lots of fighting took place. So we visited along here. The Knightsbridge Cemetery is in this area. First place we visited was the Australian Fig Tree Memorial. The Fig Tree Hospital. And this is my son standing in a gateway of the fence that had been built around to protect this fig tree. In Australia, quoting from an Australian piece. In Australia, here is a fig tree known as the Tobruk fig tree. It got its name because this tree marked the entrance to the Fig Tree Hospital, where an Australian base to treat the wounded at Tobruk. The Fig Tree Hospital was an underground network of caves. The tree still marks the spot. It's the only feature in an otherwise barren landscape. So here's the entrance to these caves. Now, we couldn't get far into them because it's been infilled by sand and other oddments and stuff, but you can see the entryway. I guess underneath this whole area is a network of caves that were able to have a safe hospital. But a cutting of this tree was taken and planted at the Melbourne Shrine of Remembrance. And a plaque on Australia reads as follows: Australian and Allied forces who fought in the siege of Tobruk became known as the Rats of Tobruk. The siege was the first defeat of the German land forces in World War II. The original fig tree was a significant landmark in Tobruk. The tree in Melbourne, has been grown from a cutting taken from the original tree in the battlefields. And it was brought back to Australia by one of the original Rats of Tobruk. So the Fig Tree Hospital. Now we get out into the defense line, and we see, for example, here's two examples of defenses that have been badly damaged by the fighting. But there's a lot like this. Here's a tank trap. Now, it's been filled in a lot by sand. It was considerably deeper at the time. Here's, in one of the trenches, is the emblem of the Italian unit that actually built the defenses in the 30s. Here is a close inspection. There is sound to this, but it doesn't tell us anything except a little kitty saying, "Come, Daddy."
The trench in the S3 position.
This is Lucy.
Okay, let's go this.
No, sometimes it's Lucifer.
Where's Adam? We can go under?
Come on through here, Daddy. It's dark, but...
Have you gone in here before, Lucy?
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Okay. All right, buddy.
Turn on your phone.
Ooh, scary stuff.
Great. Let's see the light over here. Hold my hand. Oscar, hold Adam's hand.
And this is little kid leading through this.
Walk straight.
Oh, here we are, Daddy.
And then out we come.
Out we go.
Ah, there we go.
That was pretty neat.
And we go.
These are the type of defenses that we find. There's the number, S3. There, as I say, those are numbered all the way around that defense line.
S3.
More of the same. But there's stuff lying all over the battlefield still. Back up. This mine was really empty. It was just the shell of the mine. It was clear. There's some question about this fellow here, though. Wire all over the place. Piles and piles and piles and piles of wire. And here is sort of the end of our expedition. This fort at Ras al Medawar. This Ottoman fort it sits high on that, and about the center of that defense line. It sits high so it's a good observation post. There was lots of action in this particular area. One of my souvenirs, there's Muhammad, has autographed my map of the defense line. There we were, we're numbering, I don't know whether you can see them, we were numbering the various places we were at. So, pretty historic time, pretty powerful time. As I return to my opening, the idea of being able to put your dusty boots where some of your heroes have walked and have an opportunity to remember them honorably. And as they say in the old one-reelers, as the sun sinks slowly in the west, we say goodbye to the battlefields of Tobruk. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. Questions are free. Answers are debatable or negotiable.
Doug?
Sir?
How many Australians were defending Tobruk?
I don't know. It was the Australian 9th Division, so it's division.
15,000. Now,
Probably wasn't 15,000 most of the time there. There were a lot of casualties. It was tough getting reinforcements in. My reading, and I've read a lot of books on this, that my reading is that it was a very, very grim place to be. Very, very grim place to be. But being Australians, it was pretty tough to beat them, I think.
Like you mentioned Bletchley Park. I understand that Montgomery had information about Rommel's supply lines, etc., and that was a real assist to his efforts in ALAMEIN.
True enough, but my understanding is that they were very, very leery at giving Rommel any of this stuff, or giving Montgomery any of this stuff. Partly because he was not subject to the controls that they required of recipients of Enigma. And they were also burned by that American diplomat who sent all the news he gathered from British intelligence back to the States in easily decoded messages that the Germans got. So the Brits couldn't figure out how the Germans knew all what the Brits were up to, and it was this American diplomat that worked in Cairo and would give it access to all this stuff, and he just sent messages back home saying, "Oh, look what they're doing." So there's various reasons for that, but yes, you're right. There were some Enigma decrypts that were helpful here too. Most helpful was the fact that they sunk most of the German supplies getting across the Med.
Doug, can you explain, or can you explain why the British created these boxes and stuff if they were so out of whack with tactical philosophy? There's a wonderful book by called The Desert Generals by Coralie Barnett. Coralie Barnett, I think, is the name. Part of the problem in 1940-41 that the generals who were generalizing or generaling or leading didn't have tank experience, didn't have armored experience, hadn't read de Gaulle's book, had no idea. They were still on horses. They didn't really understand how properly to use armor. Now, that improved. I think Wavell was given a bum steer by Churchill, but some of the people that he had to work with at the next level down were pretty stubborn. And the most recent book, author escapes me, just called El Alamein. It's within the last couple of years. Really goes into this and points out that difficulty of getting, you've got people on the ground are swanning about in tanks and they're learning how to use tanks. That's where I learned, or it came from the stuff I learned as a young subaltern. Use them one at a time, lose them one at a time, and all that stuff. That all came from the subalterns and the people on the ground. But getting it back up the line 3 or 4 divisions for people to really understand what was necessary was tough. Now Montgomery arrived, and yeah, he did a wonderful job, but he arrived to a situation where a lot of this had been solved, and he also had the equipment, but he also provided the leadership that, of course, had made it happen. But so it's like anything. You know, the old guys, we old guys, sometimes take a hard time to learn. And if you're not out sitting in, can you imagine operating in an armored vehicle in 40-degree desert temperatures with the hatch down and your gun firing? I can't imagine. I mean, I've spent time in a tank in temperate temperatures. So they're learning.
So in those boxes, did they have armored units inside them to sort of punch out every once in a while?
Yes.
What they were supposed to do?
Yes. But they were sort of waiting for the Germans to arrive. You know? And it was... The Battle of Gazala is an interesting one to read about. It was a near-run thing, as somebody once said. Sir?
Do you have any contact with the long-range desert group? Working inland and in and out of Tobruk?
I've read everything that could be read about them.
Me too.
Sad thing, if you've been to the, I'm sure you have, been to the Imperial War Museum in London, where they had that poor battered LRDG truck, flat tires and everything sitting there. I hope they someday do something to it, but yeah, there's a great, what's the great movie? Not the one with Humphrey Bogart. There's another great movie that talks about the LRDG that does, you know, back in the...
Desert Sand.
Yes, thank you. Well done. Give the man a Cupid doll.
Doug?
Yeah. Oh.
Did you see any of the Italian war graves with the Italian colonial North African troops?
Didn't see any sign of it.
Really? Okay.
No, that's a good question. I never thought of that, but didn't see a sign of it. The Italians, not highly thought of in Libya.
True.
Not highly thought of in Libya. In fact, as you go through that green mountain areas, there's caves you go past where the rebels, the Libyans tried 2 or 3 times over the years to rise up against the Italians, and there's brutal. But there's caves and stuff where they did. Omar Mukhtar, thank you, my dear. Omar Mukhtar was the great Libyan hero, but he lost that one too. But yeah, I mean, the Libyans didn't exactly. I mean, you read about what the British troops found in the Italian camps in that first phase where they sort of rolled them up, silk sheets and the mobile field brothels and the champagne and the stuff. They weren't exactly fit to fight. Yes, sir.
But isn't it true that the Italians actually switched sides during the Battle of North Africa?
No.
They were on one side.
No. The Italians stayed at war until halfway through the Italian campaign. When,
43.
yeah,
43.
but that was, yeah, the desert campaign was over by then. The Canadians and the Brits and the Americans were working their way up the Italian peninsula and
Yes.
Italy.
I know of incidents where the Italians were manning the airfields for the Allies when they were coming to move farther east.
No, could be. I have not seen of it, but I would not begin to disagree with you.
They were labeled prisoners of war, but they were working for the Allies.
Interesting.
I take it everybody was in North Africa for the oil?
No.
Why was everybody...
There's no oil. Oil hadn't been discovered.
So why... Did
It was Suez. It was Suez, and it was the oil in the Middle East. Because if Hitler got the Suez Canal and they were able to move up into the Middle East to get at those oil fields in Russia. But the oil hadn't been discovered in Libya at that stage. All it had was sand, camels, and all that stuff. Anyway. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, one more. I knew I couldn't get away without.
Hi, Doug. Before Montgomery came into North Africa, the British general who did all the organization was General Gott. And he was killed in a plane crash.
Yes, that's right. He was supposed to take...
What was his military record? Because very little is written about him, yet he did most of the legwork for Montgomery.
He did. He was instrumental in actually the retreat towards Dunkirk and getting he was involved in all that stuff. So he made his name there. And he was originally scheduled to come and take the post that became Montgomery's, but he died in that plane crash. Yeah. And he, I think, if I recall, may have been one of those generals that maybe had a clue or two about armored warfare. So, yeah, he was highly thought of. Strafer Gott.
Very young, 45.
Yeah. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm leaving. I'm shutting up.
On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for listening to us today. Watch for announcements of future event transcripts, and we hope that you will be able to join us in person for our regular speakers events. Once again, thank you for tuning into our podcasts, and have a wonderful day.